Welcome to the history section.
Today we're examining the first generation of Christian missionary work in Japan.
Right, specifically the period between 1552 and 1582. And our goal here is to really get past some of the more romanticized histories.
Yes, accounts like those from the 17th century, which often paint a picture of just this constant sweeping success.
The kind of unstoppable wave of conversion.
Exactly. What we want to do is conduct a more empirical review, looking at the actual reach and the strategy of the Jesuit mission in Kyushu.
And we're leaning very heavily on their own records for this.
We are. The annual letters, the internal reports from the Society of Jesus itself.
And those records, they paint a very different picture.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of success, yes, but a success built on commerce and coercion.
Much more so than any kind of mass spiritual awakening. That distinction is really crucial.
It is. I mean, you mentioned the early chroniclers, people like Charlevoix.
Mm-hmm.
They suggested that Francis Xavier, even before he left, had converted thousands of people almost overnight.
And that created this profound but ultimately misleading impression of vast success right from the very beginning.
But the research demands a pretty significant correction to that idea.
A huge correction. If you look at the records closely, Xavier's actual reach was incredibly limited.
Both in terms of numbers and geography.
Right. So he leaves Japan in November 1551. Charlevoix claimed something like 3,000 converts in Yamaguchi alone.
And the real number.
The evidence suggests it's questionable if Xavier baptized more than 1,000 people across the entire country before he left.
1,000. And that 1,000 is spread very, very thin.
Incredibly thin. His efforts were confined to just 4 fiefs: Satsuma, Hirado, Yamaguchi, and Bungo.
And even within those, the numbers in Bungo, which would become so important later, were tiny.
Almost negligible. Fewer than 20 converts at that point. It just highlights the foundational struggle they were facing.
This wasn't some backwater. This was a colossal, highly sophisticated society.
And one that was, for the most part, quite resistant to a foreign ideology.
To really get a sense of the scale of that challenge, we need to look at the demographics of Japan at the time.
Mm-hmm. Because this wasn't a small country they were walking into.
No. If you work backward from the later Tokugawa estimates, the population in the mid-16th century was massive, somewhere between 15 and 20 million people.
And that number, it puts Japan on par with the largest European powers of the day.
Or even larger in some cases.
Right. Think about the House of Austria's dominions, maybe 16.5 million in 1580. France was about 14.3 million.
Spain was smaller, around 8 million. And England was tiny in comparison.
Just 4.6 million. So the sheer scale of the society these few missionaries were trying to engage with was immense.
So with that population of 15 to 20 million in mind, we can now look at the official Jesuit figures after 30 years of work.
And these are definitive statistics. They come from the annual letter of 1582, compiled by Father Coelho.
And verified by the Visitor General himself, Valignani.
Yes, so they're giving the count for the end of 1581, 30 years exactly after Xavier departed.
The total number of Christians in the entire empire.
Approximately 150,000.
So you do the math on that. 150,000 against a population of at least 15 million.
The conclusion is pretty inescapable.
After 3 decades of continuous effort, Christians represented no more than 1% of the total population.
It was a statistical blip on a national scale.
And even that 1% success was highly, highly localized, which is maybe the most telling detail of all.
It is. Of that 150,000 total, 125,000 of them were in Kyushu,
the westernmost island.
And even more critically, 115,000 of those were crammed into 5 very small, politically marginal territories.
Arima, Omura, Hirado, Amakusa, and Gochu.
These were not the great, powerful domains of central Japan. Omura, for example, which was a key Christian fief, was rated at only 25,000 koku.
The measure of rice revenue that signified a fief's wealth.
Exactly. And Arima was a bit larger at 40,000 koku.
To put that in perspective, the great domains were measured in the hundreds of thousands or even millions of koku.
So these Christian strongholds were, fiscally speaking, little more than small county seats.
And meanwhile, Bungo, which was their initial great hope in a sprawling domain, now only had 10,000 Christians.
A real decline in its importance to the mission.
So success was clustered in these coastal areas, the ones desperate for foreign trade.
Right. And the remaining 25,000 converts were scattered very thinly across places like the Kyoto district and Yamaguchi.
What makes that 150,000 figure even more extraordinary, though, is the missionary manpower that achieved it.
It's almost unbelievable. They were running on a shoestring, personnel-wise, for decades.
The records show that down to 1563, there were never more than 9 members of the Company of Jesus in all of Japan.
And by 1577, that had only crept up to 18.
So that's 25 years with fewer than 20 missionaries trying to convert a population the size of France and Spain combined.
It really underscores the difficulty of the task and the sheer dedication of the priests who were there.
The real growth in personnel came much later.
It did. Between 1577 and 1579, the number suddenly jumped from 18 to 55.
And then it peaked at 75 by 1582.
And many of these new recruits were coming from India, or, fascinatingly, they were Portuguese traders.
Right, men who arrived on the great ship from Macau, saw the mission's operations, and then decided to join the society right there in Japan.
So it was a very localized success and one achieved by strategic rather than purely spiritual means.
Okay, let's pivot then to the actual establishment of the mission after Xavier left. So the years 1552 to 59.
At first, it's just Torres and Fernandez left behind in Yamaguchi. But in August 1552, crucial reinforcements arrive.
Father Gego and brothers Alcasiva and De Silva.
And they very quickly assess the situation. They realize that stability lies in securing patronage from a powerful lord.
So their strategy immediately shifts to Funai in Bungo.
Seeking the protection of the great daimyo, Somososhina. They arrived there in September.
And they came prepared. They brought valuable diplomatic gifts from the Viceroy of India.
It was all about establishing that patron-client relationship. And Tomo Surin received them favorably.
Helped by Fernandez, who was fluent in Japanese and acted as the interpreter.
Right. And Tomo was effusive in his letters back to the Viceroy. He promised to care for the fathers. He said he wanted more missionaries.
And that he'd do anything to please the King of Portugal.
The Jesuits saw this as a sign of imminent conversion. But the historical sources tell a different story.
It was purely commercial maneuvering.
Entirely. Tomo, at this point, was being incredibly cautious about the religion itself. He valued the priests because they were the gateway to that lucrative Portuguese trade.
And that caution was really put to the test in 1556.
Yes, when the vice-provincial, Núñez Barreto, arrived in Bungo specifically to push for Tomo's conversion.
He's hoping to establish a major Christian base in the region.
And his efforts failed completely. Tomo's refusal really laid bare the obstacles the mission was facing.
He cited political anxieties, for one. He just put down several internal revolts.
He was worried about secret disaffection. He even retreated to a fortified position, which shows his fear that converting would just destabilize his rule.
Then there was the personal cost.
Barreto noted that Shomo knew full well that becoming Christian would require a fundamental and very public change in his personal morals.
And he just wasn't prepared to accept that.
And politically, he suspected his subjects, particularly the samurai, would not tolerate a Christian ruler.
He feared they might even turn on him.
But the deepest resistance was philosophical. He adhered to a school of thought that was essentially materialistic.
The idea that the soul perishes with the body.
Exactly. He denied the existence of spirit or anything beyond sensory perception. So the core tenets of Christianity, eternal life, divine judgment, were completely irrelevant to him.
Barreto, seeing this, he asked for a public debate with the learned Buddhist priests, the bonzes.
Hoping to discredit them, and Shomo verbally promised one, but
It never happened.
never. And that just highlights the immense political power of the bonzes. They were intensely hostile to the Jesuits.
And they were politically embedded, often related by marriage to the chief men in the kingdom.
Sponsoring a public debate was simply too risky for Shopo. He was trying to consolidate power, not start a religious civil war.
And events soon forced the mission to shift its entire base of operations anyway.
Right. In 1556, a major revolt in Yamaguchi. The town was burned.
Forcing Torres to flee to Bungo.
And that move was permanent for a very long time. When Mucha Motonari seized control of that fief, one of his first acts was to proscribe the foreign religion.
So Yamaguchi was closed to them for decades.
Until around 1585, so Bungo became the sole base of operations for the mission.
And the whole contingent at that point was just 8 men.
8 men for all of Japan. Torres, Fernandez, Gago, De Silva, Vilela, plus 3 new Portuguese converts.
But one of those new converts was singularly important.
Almeida.
A wealthy Portuguese trader who brought extraordinary assets with him.
The research notes he wasn't a great theologian, but he was highly skilled in surgery and medicine. That gave him immediate practical value.
And his financial backing was monumental for the mission.
One account says he invested 5,000 crowns, his entire personal fortune into establishing hospitals.
Another mentions an extra 4,000 ducats invested in trade, specifically for the benefit of the Jesuits.
And he was known for his energy, his tact. He became the mission's go-to person for these complex, difficult projects.
And his skills were soon put to use in Funai, where he set up charitable institutions that would, paradoxically, create a huge sociological barrier to the mission's goals.
Yes, Almeida's work in Funai provides a really deep and sometimes disturbing insight into the societal conditions of the time.
He established 2 hospitals dealing with very pressing social crises.
The first one was for patients suffering from leprosy and other infectious diseases, specifically syphilis.
And the establishment of this hospital in the 1550s is a key detail.
It is, because it directly refutes later claims that syphilis didn't appear in Japan until much later, in the 1620s or 30s.
The presence of Portuguese traders in Bungo harbors for the previous 14 years likely contributed to its early spread.
The second hospital addressed a crisis born of pure economic desperation.
It was a refuge for newborn children whose parents abandoned or killed them because of extreme poverty.
A practice of infanticide that the Jesuits noted repeatedly.
Father Villela wrote about it, lamenting that if parents were doing this when prices were low, the situation in a famine would be catastrophic.
And the poverty among the country people was intense. Later missionary accounts even document cases of cannibalism during severe famines.
Which just underscores the grinding desperation they were facing.
It does, but Almeida's hospitals, though established with a lot of popular support, had this critical unintended consequence.
They created a barrier that repelled the elite classes in Bungo from ever accepting Christianity.
The Vice-Provincial Cabral's letter from 1576 spells it out explicitly. He says the faith gained its first foothold among people of low condition and those suffering from contagious diseases.
So because the mission was so strongly associated with the sick and the destitute, the most marginal people in society, the gospel itself was held in such little reputation in Funai.
The fear was purely social. It was about status, which was everything in feudal Japan.
Cabral says that no man of position would dare to accept it, merely lest he should be confounded, conque pleb.
Lest he be lumped in with that common populace.
And the implication of that was devastating for the mission's broader ambitions.
Absolutely. The elite basically concluded that this foreign faith was only suitable for the outcasts, the diseased, the desperately poor.
And this social stigma just severely limited conversions among the ruling class.
For 2 decades before 1576, the missionaries made fewer than 2,000 converts in Bungo.
And almost all of them were the sick and poor who were seeking Almeida's medical care.
The contempt was palpable. Missionary reports talk about suffering insults daily, with people openly saying Christianity was a law for the sick and poor.
And Tomo's own refusal to convert, despite tolerating the priests, just reinforced this.
His vassal saw him, one of the wisest men in Japan, rejecting the faith, which they took as confirmation that the law was insignificant, only for the lowest social strata.
The mission had fundamentally failed to achieve broad, respected conversion in its most powerful base.
All because its initial success was tied to treating society's most marginalized people.
So the failure in Bungo demonstrated a very harsh reality.
That if they were going to succeed, they needed leverage beyond theological arguments.
And this realization led directly to the use of economic coercion.
Which, starting in the late 1550s, is what forged the first truly successful Christian fiefs.
The turning point really begins with the Hirado case study.
In 1557, Portuguese ships start frequenting Hirado Harbor, so Gago, Fernandes, and Villela establish a mission there.
Villela was especially successful, using some theatrical methods to attract children.
He also introduced practices like self-scourging or bodily discipline, which was seen as a meritorious act.
But the critical development was the conversion of Anthony, the daimyo Matsura's brother.
And Anthony's zeal immediately led to iconoclasm, the destruction of local temples and idols,
Which, naturally, outraged the bonzes.
A full-scale riot erupted, and Daimyo Matsura had to ask Villela to temporarily withdraw in 1559 to calm things down.
Now, Matsura's initial hesitation to let the priests back in was based on a simple calculation.
He assumed the Portuguese traders would keep coming anyway. He didn't think he needed the priests to get the commerce.
And that assumption gave Torres the perfect opening to demonstrate the depth of their commercial leverage.
Right. Torres rushes to Hirado when the next Portuguese merchant ship arrives. He's received with great deference by the captain.
And then, in this very calculated display of power, Torres gets the captain to abruptly raise anchor.
The captain declares he can't remain in a country where his fellow believers are mistreated.
The message was immediate and unambiguous.
Maltreatment of Christians means the total loss of valuable Portuguese trade. The Jesuits had successfully weaponized commerce.
And this situation was instantly recognized and exploited by Matsura's rival.
Omura Sumikata, a neighboring princelet who controlled the territory that would later become Nagasaki.
Sumitada shrewdly saw that Matsura's strained relationship with the Jesuits was a massive commercial weakness he could capitalize on.
So he proposed attracting the Portuguese fleet exclusively to his ports, offering incredibly advantageous terms.
And his motivation, as local Japanese accounts suggest, was purely pragmatic.
He pretended to lean towards the foreign religion simply to get exclusive access to the Portuguese and their firearms,
which were a decisive element in regional warfare at the time.
So his offer for the harbor of Yokosuka was spectacular.
Freedom from all dues for 10 years.
Cession of the port and 2 leagues of the adjoining land.
And exclusive settlement rights for Christians, prohibiting any non-believer from settling there without the missionaries' consent.
This was a full commercial and religious commitment. Sumitada was baptized in 1562.
And that marks the beginning of this aggressive, top-down conversion driven entirely by economic and military need.
But this coercion immediately sparked internal resistance.
Revolts broke out, culminating in the burning of the new Christian town of Yokosuka.
Sumitada suppressed the rebellion, though, showing his commitment. And by 1564, he received a formal pledge of eternal friendship from the King of Portugal.
His religious commitment was being very handsomely rewarded.
Meanwhile, the instability at Yokosuka led the Portuguese traders to identify a better, safer location.
In 1567, Omura offered to build a church at Fukai, the site that would later become Nagasaki.
It was to be a Christian asylum and a secure hub for Portuguese commerce.
And Nagasaki quickly became the main trading hub, solidifying the value of missionary friendship.
By 1573, Sumitada felt secure enough to make Omura a purely Christian domain.
He issued a public decree. All non-believers, bonzes, and laymen alike had to leave his lands.
The Jesuits moved quickly. In 7 months, 20,000 people were baptized. They drained about 60 Buddhist monasteries of their followers.
And by 1579, the entire population of Fumora, maybe 50,000 to 60,000 people, was reported as entirely Christian.
Sumitada became one of the richest princelets in Kyushu through this alliance. The sources are definitive. The majority of his 60,000 converts accepted the faith not from conviction, but from necessity or self-interest tied to that foreign trade.
And this system of coercive conversion by ruler's decree became the mission's template for success.
Yes, that Omura model, where the ruler dictates the religion of the domain, was immediately applied wherever they found a political opportunity.
The island of Amakusa is a sharp example of this.
It is. We see that direct link between conversion and commerce very early on. One chief, Kamishima, converted in 1567 just to attract trade.
When the ships didn't show up, he immediately apostatized.
And forced 1,000 of his subjects to revert with him and banish the missionaries. It proves how transactional the alliance was.
Real success came later, with a more substantial princelet who converted around 1570.
Though his progress was initially blocked by his strong-willed, anti-Christian wife.
Who was apparently a respected theologian in her own right.
She was. The Jesuits focused on her and managed to convert her around 1576.
And immediately after her baptism, the Jesuits instigated her to pressure her husband.
To issue a drastic ultimatum to his subjects: convert to Christianity or face exile.
A coordinated, top-down religious purge.
Exactly. Bonds revenues were systematically reassigned to Christian converts, and the property of non-compliant Buddhist priests was just confiscated.
The result was stunningly effective, if morally compromised.
It forced about 80% of the population to either convert or abandon their ancestral homes.
So survival, not conviction.
And this history reveals a profound irony.
Because later, when they were facing persecution from Hideyoshi, the missionaries vehemently championed the Japanese tradition of liberty of conscience.
Yet, their own internal records show that where they had the power, like in Omura and Amakusa, they readily imposed the faith from above.
Crushing the very religious freedom they later claimed was a Japanese tradition.
But they had learned a pragmatic lesson. The only way to get mass conversion was through the coercion of the rulers.
Moving on to Arima, which bordered Omura, we see another case where military need and trade leverage converged.
Missionaries had been invited to the port of Kuchinatsu as early as 1562.
The daimyo, Andrew, converted in 1576, leading to 20,000 converts.
But his successor, the young Arima, immediately tried to repress Christianity. By the end of 1579, the number of converts had been cut down to 12,000.
It's into this unstable situation that the new mission leader, Visitor General Valignani, arrives in 1579.
And Valignani was not just an administrator, he was a master strategist.
He understood the absolute need to demonstrate Christian power through both commercial and military means.
His first move was a calculated show of force. He made sure the great ship, the massive annual trader, docked specifically at Kuchinatsu, rewarding Arima's tentative hospitality.
And at a crucial moment because young Arima was facing an existential threat.
He was about to be invaded by Ryuji Masanobu of Saga, who was aggressively consolidating power.
And an old bonds, a lifeline mentor to the family, actually advised Arima that converting was the only way to save his territory.
Valignani seized this vulnerability masterfully. He deliberately delayed Arima's baptism.
He insisted that the prince's powerful non-Christian relatives must also agree to convert.
His aim wasn't just a single convert, it was to secure the entire principality as a long-term base.
And to solidify the military alliance, Valignani went even further.
He personally provisioned Arima's fortresses and secured Portuguese military support.
Arima was baptized in 1580, which led to the immediate destruction of 40 temples and the conversion of the city.
And Valignani's intent here was explicit. It was designed to inspire in the Japanese elite a greater appreciation for the military and architectural might of Christian Europe.
By showing that conversion guaranteed military and commercial aid, he hoped to counteract the Japanese belief in their own cultural superiority.
His control became so complete that when Arima failed to promptly deal with issues like concubinage or the insolence of the bonzes, Valignani threatened to withdraw the mission entirely.
And Arima rushed to comply, forcing the bonzes to choose between conversion or immediate exile.
This period really solidified the mission's core strategy. Top-down coercion, backed by Portuguese wealth and military power, was the primary engine of mass conversion.
Okay, so let's shift focus now to the dramatic collapse of the mission's most powerful patron.
Kumososhin of Bungo, a downfall that was directly linked to his very late but very fervent conversion.
Tsutomu finally accepted baptism in August 1578.
A decision that came right after he divorced his fiercely anti-Christian wife, Jezebel.
And his conversion was total and immediately radical. He embraced extreme iconoclasm.
A systematic campaign of burning and wrecking temples and shrines throughout his domain.
He intended to establish a purely Christian kingdom in his newly acquired domain of Higa.
He immediately assigned the revenues of 2 major Buddhist monasteries to the missionaries. His personal fervor was absolute.
He confessed, communicated, and attended Mass daily, often in terrible weather, and actively urged his vassals to learn the doctrine.
His political priorities had become entirely secondary to his religious zeal.
And this intense religious focus came right before a major military campaign.
In 1578, Otomo launched a massive force, somewhere between 40,000 and 70,000 men, into Hyuga,
to confront the expanding power of Shimadzu Yoshihisa of Satsuma.
But the Bungo campaign was critically undermined by this new religious devotion at the highest levels of command.
Tomo, the commander, remained a day and a half behind the main army with the Jesuits, Cabral, and Almeida,
continuing his temple destruction rather than leading his troops.
And his son, Yoshimune, who was supposed to be leading the command base, was equally distracted.
He was completely focused on his spiritual progress under Father Froze, practicing mortification like pouring cold water on himself in winter.
And even saying he wanted to execute non-Christians he deemed malicious.
There's this profound disconnect between military focus and religious performance. When Yoshimune got news of a minor early success, what did he do?
He got off his horse, knelt down, and thanked our Lord, attributing the victory entirely to the Father's prayers.
This misplaced focus contributed directly to the disaster that followed.
The Bungo army besieged Taki Castle, held by just 3,000 Satsuma troops.
Overconfident and reckless, the Bungo force was ambushed by the main Shimadzu army.
A complete military collapse at the Mimikawa. The Bungo troops were flanked and then attacked from the rear by the castle garrison.
The defeat was utterly devastating, a rout.
And the aftermath was immediate. Somo fled the battlefield, and his flight really symbolized his misplaced priorities.
He forgot provisions for the retreat, but he remembered to grab his prized crucifix.
Back in Funai, the missionaries were now in severe danger.
They faced furious hostility from the populace, the bonzes, the bereaved samurai.
They were widely and publicly blamed for the calamity.
The accusation was that their destruction of the national gods, the kami and the hotoke, had brought divine retribution down on the Bungo domain.
Otomo, though humiliated, protected the Jesuits.
He avoided admitting any strategic failure by rationalizing the catastrophe as a divine ordination.
He claimed the battle had providentially killed the very lords who had most impeded the spread of the gospel.
It allowed him to maintain his religious fervor, even as his domain was collapsing around him.
The Mimikawa disaster really marks the terminal decline of the Bungo domain.
And it forced the missionary strategy to adapt to a violently shifting political map in the years up to 1582.
Otomo's son, Yoshimune, quickly came back under the influence of his anti-Christian mother, Jezebel.
He became indifferent to Christianity and returned to the ancestral cults. And the military losses were severe.
Ryuji seized Chikugo. Akatsuki captured Chikuzen and Buzen. Satsuma took southern Higo.
Otomo lost 4 of his 5 provinces. He was basically pushed back into his ancestral fief of Bungo.
And the samurai class, the military backbone, remained overwhelmingly hostile to the foreign religion.
Many Bungo vassals explicitly said they wouldn't fight if Yoshimune continued to favor the foreign priests.
The destruction of major Buddhist sites, like the famous war god temple of Hashiman, had alienated key retainers and impoverished the clan.
The results for the mission in Bungo were bleak. By 1582, only 10,000 Christians remained.
A tiny, politically insignificant fraction of the population.
And the sources say most of them were women, children, and those from the lowest social strata. The military class was almost entirely absent.
The mission had lost its essential foothold in its most powerful early territory.
The hegemony of Kyushu was now firmly contested between the 2 remaining great powers.
Shimadzu Yoshihisa of Satsuma and Ryuji Masanobu of Saga.
And the Jesuits, despite their setbacks, immediately tried to apply their trade leverage to these new, more powerful rivals.
Shimadzu was consistently friendly to them, clearly hoping to attract Portuguese trade.
He invited them to his domains, offered land for churches. But the powerful bonzes in Satsuma, many of whom were refugees from the Christian fiefs, thwarted every effort.
They even forced non-Christian nobles to swear an oath never to convert.
Ryuji Masanobu, on the other hand, was a highly skilled politician and a zealous Buddhist.
He was suspicious of the Jesuits, but he did briefly court Valignani.
He requested that foreign ships be diverted to his port of Karatsu, recognizing the commercial value.
But Valignani pushed for a harder bargain, wanting a deeper commitment that included the conversion of Ryuji's 3rd son.
When Ryuji rejected that religious component, he immediately forbade all foreign priests from entering his domains.
So the commercial leverage was powerful, but Ryuji was strong enough to reject the religious cost of doing business.
And the political reality of 1582 was another major setback. Omura, the model Christian domain, was forced to submit to the pagan Ryuji and send its own sons as hostages.
Which caused immense anxiety for the Jesuits, worrying about the spiritual well-being of these young Christian nobles.
The mission's success was just entirely dependent on the fluctuating military fortunes of its coerced patrons.
And this failure to convert the powerful samurai class, combined with the haughty nature of the Japanese elite, it fueled intense internal debates among the Jesuits.
A major conflict arose between the former vice-provincial, Cabral, and the new visitor general, Valignani,
about the role of Japanese converts within the company.
Cabral had a profoundly skeptical view. He argued the Japanese were naturally haughty and had excellent intelligence.
He feared that if they were trained to full priestly authority, they would quickly abuse that education and come to despise Europeans.
So he restricted their training to the lowest mission posts, keeping them out of positions of theological authority.
Valignani, who replaced him, opposed this restriction. He saw it as limiting growth.
But he entirely recognized the underlying issue of Japanese pride and their sense of cultural superiority.
He knew that theological arguments and medical charity were just not enough to overcome that cultural barrier.
And Valignani's strategic response to this was the famous 1582 embassy.
He arranged for the Christian lords Omura, Arima, and what was left of Bungo to send envoys, 4 young noble youths, to the Pope in Rome.
This was partly a diplomatic move, but its primary goal was strategic and psychological.
The intent was to expose these young nobles, the future governing class, to the immense military, architectural, and political magnificence of Europe.
To the sheer scale and might of Christendom. By deliberately humbling them through this display of Western power and splendor, Valignani hoped to counteract their belief in Japanese superiority.
Making them, and future rulers, more amenable to Christian influence in the long term.
It was a sophisticated, decades-long gamble to secure future conversion efforts from the top down by modifying the cultural mindset of the Japanese elite.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed learning something new. That's all for now, but in case you didn't notice, there are a lot more episodes on this subject available on this channel. If you're enjoying these historical podcasts, please like and subscribe and share with other history buffs. While this is an AI recording, the research that has gone into this production is comprehensive and focuses on very specific moments in history, designed to bring as much detail to the listener as possible. Thanks again for listening in.